The original Resident Evil 4 is often considered to be the greatest game of all time. I mean, the insane mix of good jokes, really big, crazy boss fights, genuinely scary moments. I mean, it is a game that feels like it has a truly tremendous cultural impact. When this came out in 2005, it instantly swept every single award, every single accommodation, but now we're about to get the next big remake. And to be honest, I've loved the Resident Evil remakes. Each of them, as they've come out, have, in my mind, very much replaced the originals. I mean, personally, even as a Resident Evil mega fan, I have not really gone back and played much of the original Resident Evil 2 ever since the RE2 remake came out. So what I wanted to try and attempt is a complete, final, perfect master file of Resident Evil 4, which means I beat the game on normal difficulty, I beat the game on professional, I did every single side mode, I found every single collectible, and I wanted to give some final thoughts to perfectly reflect upon this game before the remake comes out and possibly replaces the epic classic masterpiece. What's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here. Hey, hope you're having a great day. If you could, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and now let's get into the deep dive. When it comes to nostalgia, it can definitely be a very funny drug when it comes to video games. There is definitely those experiences that perhaps you grew up with, you loved, but if you go back, they kind of suck. There's definitely a problem with the fact that our brains can sort of warp your memories to be more positive or more well-rounded than the real games actually existed. I mean, think about the fact that something like Silent Hill Homecoming is a completely hated game, but personally, I have a real soft spot for it. Going through Resident Evil 4 again for this final big playthrough, I'm actually still just blown away by how perfect it is. I mean, true, some of the assets don't look great. There's textures that are incredibly outdated, and even stuff like the cutscenes, the pre-rendered bits are incredibly blurry, but despite that, every bit of this, wall to wall, is such a incredibly fun experience. And I mean, really, going into this, I want to start things off by talking about the gameplay, because initially, at launch, this was perhaps the most controversial aspect of it. The classic Resident Evil games that I grew up with, games like Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil Code Veronica, which personally I was very obsessed with, they were games that you would consider to be slow, methodical horror. They're games that gave you incredibly limited resources. You had to literally count every single bullet as you fired it, or every time you found a healing item. It was incredibly precious. Whereas when it came to Resident Evil 4, this is straight up an over-the-shoulder shooter. You can get headshots. Every single enemy typically drops ammunition for your shotguns, for your rifles, for your machine guns. Resident Evil 4 is certainly a game that, on the surface, it's immediately apparent that they prioritized fun above all else. They wanted to make sure that the second you picked up your controller, it is a freaking blast, and that if you do happen to die to a chainsaw guy or getting stomped on by a giant, you never feel discouraged. Whereas in some of the older Resident Evils, as much as I freaking love them, dying and getting sent back to your last manual save, sometimes it could be a bit frustrating for more casual audiences. I will say that as a Resident Evil fanatic, I was completely on board with this change when it first happened back in 2005, but I was a bit just shaken by the story itself. This is a much funnier game than any other Resident Evil has ever attempted. There is constantly ridiculous jokes from the main character, Leon Kennedy, constantly making silly quips about, oh, your right hand comes off, or, oh, everybody is actually fleeing the village. Are they trying to go play bingo? Like, even going through this game again, I'm actually just so deeply impressed by the fact that Capcom just decided to shift every single bit of tone, of controls, of elements that were core to the Resident Evil idea and turn it into something else. This is a totally different genre of gaming, and I feel like the fact that it was successful is a testament to early 2000s Capcom, just how great they actually managed to be. But going through this game on professional, I was really struck by how good this game is, even in those hyper intense moments. Now, if you've never played this game before, there's two separate difficulties. There's normal and there is professional. Now, when you're playing it on professional, this is more than just a couple of extra enemies. It's more than just some extra damage. In a lot of aspects, this completely changes the nature of how each individual intense fight happens. You take about 5 times more damage. In some spots, there is triple the enemies. They even add in entirely new squads of guys that will ambush you in particular areas that happen to be at least partially safe on normal difficulty. I mean, professional is a completely different beast, which means that you have to play a lot more critically. You have to be much more careful with your upgrades, with your currency, with your ability to even aim and shoot, and how much you can knife people to try and save a couple bit of your little precious ammunition. I think professional difficulty is incredibly freaking brutal. In fact, way back in the day, I actually was trying to play professional back on my PlayStation 2, and I got so mad, I ended up throwing the console in the dumpster. So you can enjoy this video of a much younger Dreamcast guy completely just whiffing a console into a dumpster in absolute anger because I sucked at professional. But also beyond that, I think I really appreciate the fact that the control style in this, I like that every single enemy has different weak points. I like the fact that some of the weaker ganados, these starting enemies, you can shoot them in the head and just completely obliterate them before Las Plagas can even pop out. The major shift between the previous Resident Evils and this one was that back in the day, we were battling against the T-virus. It was something that was made by Umbrella that essentially caused normal people and normal creatures to become, well, zombies, to become things like lickers and tyrants and weirdo creatures that were very tough to kill. Whereas Las Plagas, these are humans of a sort. They're people that are infected with a being, a parasitic entity that is inside of them that can actually sprout up, that can control their behavior, that can activate and make them hyper aggressive. So when you're playing this, it's cool that going against a giant is actually going to make it so you have to weaken it and then shoot the parasite that pops out of its back, or going against these random cultists. It might be more effective to try and blow up their shields or try and shoot them in the knee and suplex them. I like the fact that going through this game, you really have to shift tactics from chapter to chapter. But this does bring me to the biggest criticism that definitely exists for the original Resident Evil 4. The beginning of this game is 10 out of 10 perfect. It's spooky. It's closed up. It really feels such a realistic interpretation of trying to save the president's daughter from a bunch of parasitic psychopaths. But then you get to the military base. The conclusion of this game just completely shifts tone and jumps into a weird military third-person shooter, where these people are still infected by Las Plagas, but now they have miniguns, they're firing crossbows, they're suicidally charging at you with axes and stuff. Now, I'm not going to insult this directly, but going through this again for my final multiple playthroughs, I do think that this is by far the weakest bit of the game itself, because before this, there feels like this really centered, focused terror. It's like, holy heck, how the heck am I in Spain? What are these weird zombie people yelling at me? What is Te voy a matar? Like, oh my gosh, this is so scary. And then suddenly you're going against guys with military gear and shock batons and stuff like that. It's something that feels like in the remake, I do hope this stuff either doesn't exist or is very minimized. It just feels like a strange aside that is quite unnecessary. But speaking of asides, I think my favorite part of Resident Evil 4, and perhaps the aspect I think that created it as such a cult classic, is the tons and tons of side content. While you're playing this game, there is a lot to do just in general. It is a game that allows you to pretty freely explore. There's typically a main objective you're trying to accomplish. Opening up a gate, trying to find where Ashley, the president's daughter, is actually tucked away, or sometimes just, hey, you need to kill this boss and find the next merchant so you can upgrade your guns. But then, on the side, there is a lot of optional game modes that are truly fantastic. Stuff like the shooting galleries, where doing these, they don't really make sense canonically, but they let you unlock special figurines that do silly talking. So you can get like an Ada Wong figurine that goes like, Leon, get down. It's super goofy. And then even beyond beating the main game, you have a chance to play 2 separate main missions as Ada, called Separate Ways and Assignment Ada. These are just side stories that show different interpretations of the main campaign. We get a chance to see some very different viewpoints of pivotal moments from the main story, where unbeknownst to Leon, Ada was actually helping him out by ringing a church bell or trying to throw him a rocket launcher while he's fighting a big bad boss. These side bits are not mandatory, they're completely optional, but I feel like they really enrich the fun, the experience, the scope of Resident Evil 4, and definitely when it comes to mercenaries. This is, again, an optional game mode that you unlock that basically lets you just fight waves and waves and waves of infinite bad guys. There's 4 different maps, there's unlockable characters, everybody from Hunk, which is Mr. Death from Resident Evil 2 and 3, characters like Krauser, the evil freaking villain who could turn his arm into a gigantic like monster thing. You can play as Wesker, and what's great about this is that every time you're playing it, you have a limited amount of time on the clock. By killing different Ganados, by destroying the infected, you get more time on the clock. Multipliers if you can keep a kill combo going, and a lot of points for it. It is such an incredibly addictive, completely optional bit of added content that, in my opinion, drastically improves the overall package of Resident Evil 4. I mean, this is one of those games where you can finish the main campaign in about 6 or 7 hours if you're very dedicated and kind of know the solutions to the puzzles, but even beyond the ridiculousness, even beyond just the raw entertainment factor, it's impressive that you can go so deep on what is essentially a goofy third-person action game. Across the internet, I certainly see a lot of critiques lately for the original Resident Evil 4, saying that the briefcase that stores your guns is a bit of a goofy idea, or saying that the controls can feel a little bit clunky and unintuitive because they weren't exactly designed great back in 2005, or people trying to insult the fact that some of the monsters look a bit cartoonish. But for my money, I still think this game is truly top-notch. I own it on Nintendo Switch, I own it on Xbox, I own it on the PlayStation 4, and running through it, I still think this game manages to be frightening when it wants to be frightening. Being the little president's daughter, Ashley, and having these moments where you cannot fight back, where you're pretty much defenseless and having to sneak through little bits of puzzly library bits, being Leon and going against a regenerator, or even towards the end of the game, trying to face down a big guy with a Gatling gun who has you pinned down beneath a box. I think this game, wall to wall, every hour of it, every minute of it, it's something that I'm actually just so impressed by how much it stood the test of time. I hope the Resident Evil 4 remake somehow manages to be even better than this. But more specifically, I hope the Resident Evil 4 remake keeps a lot of this side content. I hope we get to play as Ada. I hope we get to do some form of mercenaries. I hope the remake lives up to all of our dreams. But I guess very, very soon, here in the next couple weeks, we're going to find out. Did you enjoy this video? Do you want to see something else like it? Well, feel free to subscribe. Hey, that's what I like. This has been fun. I appreciate going back and just checking out these retro games. I mean, I do own a lot of different versions of Resident Evil 4, clearly. In fact, don't I have a copy of a... Hey, look. Here it is on PlayStation 4. Bam, look at that. Thank you for watching. This video was fun to do, for sure. If you want to see me do more retro reviews for stuff that is about to become a remake, feel free to subscribe and like this video. If this video gets 5,000 likes, I'll do this, but for Silent Hill 2 next. We'll do everything in Silent Hill 2, and check that out one last time before that mythological remake finally appears.